In 1901, a field nurse disappeared while delivering vaccines to a remote ravine in Appalachia. Her bag was found neatly sealed next to a cabin in Pinewood. Inside, the syringes were intact, and a diary entry with the chilling words, "They have what I came to give." The house held 13 people, none with last names, none with birth records. When the authorities returned, the house was deserted. Only the counting marks on the walls remained, and under the mantelpiece, a note. "We keep the blood pure, so it does not disappear." If you're listening to this story, like and subscribe if you're ready to enter the dark history of a family that science refuses to name. And right now, where are you watching? What time is it where you're listening? There's a strange comfort in knowing that though we're far apart, we're all following the same story. On the 1892 census of Wolfe County, Kentucky, there is a single line at the bottom of page 143, written in a much tighter hand than the lines above. The ink is lighter, as if the pen has not been dipped again. The household register lists 13 individuals, 12 living, 1 deceased. But the place where the family name should have been entered is blank. No slashes, no XX, just a blank, as if the recorder didn't know where to begin. The house, if it can be called a house, is in a wooded ravine that the old scouts called Grins Hollow. No official map marks it, but locals say only someone who has walked through it since childhood could find the way. The land has never been legalized or recognized. Yet the house has stood there for more than 40 years, evolving from a 2-room shack into a rickety complex of extensions, porches, and connecting hallways. When asked, the neighbors shrugged. Mountain people keep their jobs. The census taker, an Ohioan named Lewis Farley, was neither brave nor naive. He had documented families wiped out by disease for generations. He had been bitten spat on and nearly killed in a Clay County blizzard. But the Grins Hollow report would be the last he submitted before retiring. Farley's field notes read, "Arrived at settlement under direction of boy who appeared behind my car at dawn. Led through brush for over an hour. Huts made of untreated pine logs. Group of 13 6-adult males, 4 adult females, 3 small children. All refused them. Oldest woman called father uncle, uncle brother. No one dared to look straight. When speaking, they repeated each other's sentences. One boy had finger bones fused into a single sheet. Asked again for his name, said, 'We are now down to 13, don't break it.' I wrote down the number and left. List incomplete. Follow-up recommended. No follow-up was done. Farley's file was unmarked. The page, though kept in the federal archives, was never indexed with other surveys. Researchers combing through the 20th century digitized records found that the page ending at 74 Grins Hollow was marked M75. The pencil number had been erased and rewritten several times, as if the decision had been impossible to hold. A photograph believed to be of Farley turned up decades later at a Winchester yard sale. He stood by a pine fence, gaunt, his left hand behind his back, his eyes looking away. Behind him, faintly, a structure loomed through the trees. What caught the eye most was the shadow of the window appearing twice in the pane, as if the window reflected more than Farley's retreat. There are places in Appalachia that stubbornly resist being named. Not because of mystery or law, but for a simple reason: a collective refusal to return. Briar's Tongue Ridge is one of them, curving like a jawbone, looking down into a ravine so deep the sunlight rarely reaches the floor. The few scouts who attempted to track the land in the 1870s describe it in unfinished sentences as if language had stopped mid-sentence. On an 1879 forestry map, a narrow black V marked the area next to which, in faded ink, was written, "Tongue of Briar, not leveled." No one named the water that flowed through the gorge, nor the mountain path that curved inward without ever reconnecting with the main trail. It was as if the terrain itself refused to be formalized. Families who lived in neighboring gorges, who had been here since before the Civil War, passed on silent instructions to their children: do not answer if called from the woods, and never leave a mirror exposed after sunset. These were not ordinary superstitions. They were rules born of proximity to the place. Hunters noted a strange absence in the gorge: no birds, no deer trails, no rustling bushes. The ground sounded too slow, the calls did not ring as they usually did. Some said it was too quiet. Others said everything was too symmetrical. The trees on either side of the gorge growing at perfect mirror angles, even the twists of the bark were similar. Some returned from short trips, unable to remember the direction they had taken, their compasses not turning in a full circle, but just swaying in place as if waiting. A local minister, Reverend Cecil Moore, kept a sermon diary for nearly 2 decades. Between fire warnings and biblical reflections, an 1884 entry reads, "Crossed the edge of the E-Hollow. The mountains bend in like a taut bow. Heard my name ring out in time, not an echo." I did not answer. Went home, tossed and turned. All night felt like leaving a part of myself there. Geologists who attempted to survey the area for minerals often failed. Rocks crumbled when lifted, sample bottles leaked even when sealed. The state never completed a soil survey, citing uneven sedimentation and incomplete results. What they did complete was a boundary map with the ravine uncolored and unnamed, as if its existence were a question mark. And yet, the family that lived there survived 5 census cycles, never having a last name and never having been recorded by the same person. By 1892, those who lived near the ravine began calling the ravine residents simply Ben, a name that came not from cruelty, but from geography, to mark what was not standing still. On a cold January morning in 1901, a retired forester passing along the edge of Briar's Tongue reported seeing a group of children sitting in a perfect semicircle, their backs to the trail, facing a dark patch of forest where there was no path. He claimed that the children never once turned around, though their shadows seemed to move with his steps. No one knows what they were looking at, only that he saw nothing. There is no official medical record for the condition, once called inbred sameness, but the term appears in 3 separate handwritten reports by Appalachian field doctors between 1881 and 1902. Each note describes children in isolated families with physical characteristics so similar that no one, not even their caregivers, could tell them apart. Phrases like duplication, beyond fraternal expectation, and indistinguishable dental wear at age variance appear repeatedly, but none of the reports were formally documented. The most detailed was by Dr. Elias Greer, a traveling physician who visited the ravines of southern Wolfe County twice a year. He recorded in his private diary of 1894 later, preserved by a university archivist, he visited a household in the Briar's Tongue Mountains and found 4 children with asymmetrical deviation of the right eye, underdeveloped left eyebrow, small cleft chin, uniform, lower teeth, and a gait that deviated to the left but not due to limb deformity. The speech was slow and repetitive, one child beginning a sentence, the second completing it with perfect rhythm. He sketched a diagram of the facial features, pencil strokes overlapping faint where they could not be distinguished. News of these children spread through the ravines faster than a doctor's diary. The language used by the locals was not medical, but rich in imagery, mirror-eyed, same-faced kinfed. A midwife from the Estelle district reported that in 1890, when called to assist in a birth, the family's eldest daughter acted as assistant, anticipating all the instructions before they were spoken. When asked the name of the newborn, she replied, "We don't name it until it speaks for itself." Other records describe the children's strange habits when sitting together. Often sitting cross-legged in order of age, their eyes blinked out of sync. The blinks went from left to right, then reversed. A coal merchant who passed through the ravine to deliver salt and cloth noted that the youngest child imitated all his gestures, but a beat behind, as if trying to catch up. Not with the movement, but with the memory of it. According to Dr. Greer's notes, their bones were soft in the joints, but not broken in spirit. X-rays did not yet exist, but he described joints that rotated wider than normal fingers, that were bent at rest, and a spine that was immobile when observed sitting, resisting natural vibration. There was no discussion of blood relations. There was not even a sense of generational order. Family members referred to each other as next, not with affection or clarity, but as a system of ingrained labeling. Ages were only implied. No one spoke the numbers. By early spring 1895, rumors around neighboring counties began to grow urgent. Hunters near the ravine had carved crosses into trees followed by their reflections. Older people took them as "don't come back" signs. A Lee County post office filed a complaint after receiving 3 identical letters with no return address, each requesting birth records for the year yet to come. The handwriting, ink, and pressure of the pen were all consistent. It seemed that the children were more than just alike. They learned to reflect more quickly. In the fall of 1896, a traveling physician named Dr. Harold A. Wexley recorded a series of field observations on his last trip through eastern Kentucky. His medical bag, kept by his descendants but rarely opened, contained a leather-bound diary with 41 entries. Most were about common Appalachian diseases, rickets, scurvy, infected wounds, chills. But entry 34 was different in tone and detail and undated. The handwriting, confident in the other entries, was here awkward, the letters seeming to be in motion or under scrutiny. The entry began, "Entered homestead on hind foot after wagon stopped on a landslide road. Air stifling, though not hot. No insects. Children seen from open spaces. Adults appeared only after the number of children had been fully called out by the youngest." The visit was prompted by a parish nurse who reported a clustering of congenital features in a family that could not be explained by common descent. Wexley, who had briefly studied at the College of Physicians in Philadelphia before returning to the frontier, was known for noting anomalies with scholarly precision. But what he saw this time made him take notes in an unusually quiet manner. He described in anatomical terms the symmetry of the jaws, the prominent underbites that gave a uniform curve to the chin. Each individual had identical nasal deviations, but no history of trauma. The hands were remarkable. The fingers were all bent inward at rest, giving the impression of a closed hand, even when relaxed. The joints were flexible, but resisted manipulation. Attempts to measure them were refused. He circled the phrase "resists correction" as if unsure whether it was anatomical or behavioral. Wexley even made a point of repeating the name before speaking. Adults called the same 13 names in the same order, none of which matched the birth records. When asked to identify themselves, the children looked at the eldest woman, who replied with a single sentence, "You heard us." He compiled the report and sent it to the Kentucky State Board of Medicine by courier. No response. The report was not filed, indexed, or acknowledged. When Wexley asked again 2 months later, a secretary said no package had arrived. A check of the same year's mail showed a blank from October 12th to 19. Several of the country doctor's reports were missing, but only Wexley's had a receipt apparently signed and then removed. In 1953, long after his death, Wexley's granddaughter donated the surviving journal to the University of Louisville Medical History Archives. Entry 34 was scanned and cross-checked with surrounding counties. No medical records for the family were ever found. They, if they ever knew, do not appear in any of the registers. Where are you following this story from? What time is it where you are listening? Take a look around. Is there anything like the quiet or strange symmetry in the canyon? The diary entry ends not with a conclusion but with a final line. They do not suffer, but they do not change. Just below, an unusual handwriting, larger and more angular than Wexley's, appears faintly in the lower margin. It is written in a mirror-like script, and when turned upside down, it reads, "You should not have written it down." The ink is darker. The pressure is stronger, and it is not at all like Wexley's. In the basement of the Wolfe County Courthouse, stacked beneath years of crisp tax and marriage records, the birth registers from 1851 to 1891 are still intact, neatly handwritten, leather-bound, yellowed at the corners. Hundreds of entries record the family lines of the area: farmers, coal miners, millers, their children named with baptismal notes beside them. But in all those 40 years, not a single entry mentions a birth in the ravine below Briar's Tongue. This absence was not only strange, but also almost biologically inexplicable. By the time of the 1892 census, 13 people ranging from infants to nearly 60 years old were confirmed to have lived in the cabin at Grins Hollow. Their physical development, according to 2 separate medical observations, strongly suggested natural births. Yet, not a single doctor, midwife, or minister within a 4-mile radius could recall attending a birth for the family. Some denied, knowing others admitted to remembering, but with an unease still hanging over the room. In an archived letter, retired midwife Belinda Knox of Lee County wrote, "I knew of the family, or perhaps I did not, if you ask me. I was only called up there once. It was winter and the road was as slippery as glass. When I arrived, they said the child had been born. But when I asked to see, everyone looked at each other and said, 'He has gone in.' I don't believe I helped, and I never went back." No baptism records are kept in the county church for any of its members. Pastors traveling throughout the area reported being led only over the edge of the ridge, never into the ravine. A diary entry by Reverend Thomas Bales, dated March 1883, describes a strange incident. He was invited to perform a naming ceremony near the ravine. But when he arrived, he was told the child had already been claimed. When asked by whom, the woman who answered the door simply said, "By us." The state required the registration of all births from 1852, but the Frankfurt Statistical Office has no records from the area until after 1904. A handwritten letter from the county clerk in 1893 mentions a group of residents near Briar's Tongue who did not respond to a summons for forensic investigation. An unsigned and undelivered memo reads, "There are names that are not called out loud. Seek confirmation in family Bibles." A popular informal record shows only one case involving this family. A burned copy of the Geneva Bible, recovered from a nearby abandoned house in 1921, contains a central genealogical page. The name is scratched off not once, but in layers almost obsessively. Below the last blacked out line, a single date, May 3rd. Some researchers speculate that the family practiced a form of closed line preservation with official registration to protect it from state intrusion. Others insist on an almost pathological suspicion of external names, refusing to accept any identity that did not originate within their walls. But these theories cannot explain the complete absence of any incidental mention. No neighbors' diaries, no witnessed births, no random rumors in the night. And yet, by 1892, there were 13 each, complete, clearly related, but invisible on paper, as if they had been born by memory. In the far margin of a draft census found in a drawer, the babies were mistakenly recorded as dead Miss C. Someone had written in pencil. Some were born without a record, some were recorded without birth. The handwriting did not match the census taker. The line had been erased once, but not cleanly. As the state began expanding rural education in the early 1880s, itinerant teachers were sent into remote parts of the Kentucky hills, paid to set up portable classrooms and record student numbers. Among the scattered observations, most of them brief, dismissive, or overly hopeful, only a few items stand out: mismatched ink, tight, twisted margins, and in almost every case, a hastily repeated warning. Below the main entry, "Children near the creek, don't talk right. Where are you listening to this story? What time is it where you're listening?" Imagine looking around. Is it so quiet that it's scary? The children from the slopes below Briar's Tongue were, by all accounts, eager to learn. They arrived at the makeshift classroom at the same time, often before the teacher took their seats, without prompting, and watched without blinking. Their names were never spoken aloud. When asked, they simply returned the question, "What is your name?" And the question was mirrored back with the same rhythm as if the answer had been extracted between words and returned. This phenomenon was repeated over and over again, all 13 of them, each child answering only by reflection. One teacher, Miss Lillian Marrow of Estelle County, who taught briefly in a borrowed church near the edge of the ravine, recorded it in a diary that survives in the Battyville Historical Archives. In an undated entry, she describes a basic math lesson. I asked the youngest, maybe 7, "What is 4 plus 5? She looked down at the floor. I repeated it slowly. "What is 4 plus 5? She waited, her lips moving, then said, "What is 4 plus 5? Her brother repeated her. Then the oldest repeated, both a beat behind. The sentence began to circle the room from mouth to mouth like an unanswered prayer. Miss Marrow writes that the children's voices never overlapped. The timing, the rhythm were mechanical, as if silence were passed from throat to throat like a thread. Other teachers noted the same phenomenon, looping syntax metaphors that were reversed when repeated questions that returned to their origins without ever coming to a conclusion. When asked, "What do you want to learn?" the children responded in unison, we want to learn what we already know. The phrase appears in 3 separate reports. An educational inspector who visited in 1891 noted that the children's sentence structure resembled a system of echolocation, more ritual than dialogue. They do not answer, he concluded. They mirror. There is no record of any of the 13 learners writing legibly. When given slates, they produced only one sign, an open curve that repeated from top to bottom, always in sets of 3. Some speculated that it was an incomplete C, others that it was a crescent or a tongue loop. None of the children said what it meant. Linguists who studied the case in the 1930s, long after the ravine had been emptied, suggested that the children might develop an internal dialect, a form of echolocation born of isolation and genetic imitation, but none of the studies were approved. The university received a rejection letter. No funds for cases without precedent. The word precedent is underlined twice. In the Kentucky Board of Education archives, the child's name does not appear, but the roll call sheet exists marked with a horizontal line across all entries as if all the names had been merged into one. At the bottom of the same page, faded in ink, is a pencil question, probably left by an unnamed clerk. If all say the same thing, who speaks first? There is never an answer. The question is circled 3 times, each time in a different handwriting. The earliest map showing the structure is dated 1843, hand-drawn in light ink by a railroad surveyor when the first tracks had not yet passed through Wolfe County. Among the topographical notes and rough sketches, a small square appears in the lower left corner, near the ridge now called Briar's Tongue, with a word written next to it, dwelling. No name, no initials, no ownership, just dwelling, as if that were enough. In the decades that followed, more detailed surveys were issued by the county clerk and the State Geological Bureau, 1856, 1871, 1889, and the cabin remained. Sometimes marked with symbols, sometimes just a neat blank space, but no map listed an owner, and the structure never appeared in the Wolfe County tax rolls from 1840 to 1900. Later clerks dismissed it as a mistake, but the deeper they looked, the more bizarre the pattern became. Each plot of land surrounding the cabin had been bought, sold, or inherited several times, but the ravine remained untouched, unrecorded, as if it had never been surveyed. No title deeds. No formal transfer had ever been recorded. The 1895 house register contains a curious margin note next to lot number 211B, cabin unclaimed. No record of building or ownership. No allocation until determined. The handwriting does not match the official clerk's. The ink is darker than the main text. It is unclear who wrote it. 2 land appraisers working 15 years apart each made separate notes on the site. The first Joseph Aberley wrote in 1879 cabin looks older than surrounding buildings, pine roof faded beyond reason. No signs of recent maintenance, but chimney still warm. The second Mrs. Bernice Klein wrote in 1894 more bluntly, cabin is there, but not in the way a house should be. It belongs to its own continuation. A surveyor tried to redraw the boundaries in 1901 to include the cabin on the tax map. Just a year later, Plot C14 was declared invalid. The land beneath the cabin had apparently been designated a public reserve in a forgotten legal decision from 1860, but that decision does not exist in the official records. Only a stamped approval form remained with the words preserved by exception. No further inquiry needed, and that form was unsigned. Local lore offers few clues. Some families remember the cabin as a constant presence, visible from the ridge at dawn, smoke from the chimney curling in the low sun. Others say the smoke moved strangely with the wind. No one remembers who built it. No one remembers who moved in. Yet, throughout the 19th century, the structure continued to expand. Hand-cut wooden beams were added. A lean-to appeared in the north in the winter of 1872. By the early 20th century, the cabin had become a maze of odd angles, folded walls, narrow corridors, and a design that was too narrow. But still no hammering, no lumber being moved, no paper trail. A 1902 map found decades later in a schoolhouse loft showed the cabin extending beyond the original footprint of the ravine. The rooms were numbered 13 in a spiral. The map ended midline. The pencil broke. In the late winter of 1901, the cabin on the slopes of Briar's Tongue was discovered empty. No search, no summons, just chance. Corbin Datchwell, an old surveyor, was inspecting the boundaries of a coal contract when he passed the ravine and saw no chimney smoke for 5 days. The silence caught his attention. As he approached, the door was ajar. The snow on the porch had no fresh footprints. He entered alone. What Datchwell found was an empty structure but not devoid of memory. No bodies, no blood, no signs of a struggle, but the air was heavy, like breath held, not yet spoken. The windows were intact. The fire had long since gone out, but the last circle of ash still held its shape undisturbed by the wind. Bowls and plates lay upside down on the table, 13 of them, but it was the floor that really caught his attention, and then his unease. On nearly every wooden plank in the cabin, dates had been carved delicately small but meticulously spaced with a sharp knife. Each line ran along the grain of the wood like a calendar to move from year to year. Earliest, May 3rd, 1851. Latest, May 3rd, 1899. Many of the dates repeated. Some years were only a year apart. Some years skipped decades. Most were the same day and month. Only the year was different. The carvings are uneven, clustered in a corner, disappearing under the wall, then reappearing on the other side. One wooden stick has May 3rd engraved 13 times each time, accompanied by a different year, but 4 of the years are the same. What is unusual is not the date, but the inexplicable coincidence. No family has 13 birth dates that match over decades. No midwife could have guided that. But the evidence is carved into the cabin itself, both intentional as scripture and eternal as ritual. Near the fireplace, a wider wooden stick bears another mark, 13 straight vertical lines. Imagine with me if you were standing on the floor of this cabin. Would you step on each of the dates carved into the wood? Would you recognize any of your birth years among them? Then a single horizontal line cut through the vertical lines, not erased, not crossed out, but cut straight, decisive with clear pressure. Beneath it, someone had carved a final sentence. None left, none added. No one left, no one added. Datchwell recorded what he saw in a memo to the county clerk, but the file was never stamped or entered. His handwriting was hurried, messy ending in an unfinished line. No one could tell which was the original May 3rd or whether any of the dates were actually original. The planks were not aligned. The following spring, when another assessor was sent to inspect Datchwell's find, the inside of the cabin had been smoked. Not a collapse, but a slow, deliberate fire that only darkened the floor. The dates were no longer visible, nor were the tallies. But when the light hits the wood at a sharp angle, some traces remain. ghost grooves shallow, but undeniable a reprint beneath the surface, a memory that refuses to fade away entirely. In the center of the room, a floorboard cracks along the grain. Inside the crack in the soft wood is a thin strip of thread. Woven through it are 13 strands, dark, brittle, human. Tied once, then again, then in a circle. Beneath the hearthstone of the cabin, between the 13 vertical lines on the floor and the long-lost warmth of the dead fire, lies a message that will never be indexed, never recognized, never taught. It is not found immediately. The hearth is heavy, the stone worn smooth by years of care and has survived the fumigation of the official inspection. But when county officials returned in the spring of 1902, intent on dismantling the structure for its materials, a mason's hammer cracked the first stone and revealed what had lain there for decades, untouched by ash or wind. The words were not written. They were carved deeply, unevenly, brutally. No decorative capitals, no signatures, just a single sentence carved directly into the pine floor. We kept the blood pure so it wouldn't disappear. The message was chilling, not because of the language, but because of its clarity. There were no strange loops or backward letters like other family communications. It was direct, assertive. But what followed, what was left unsaid, was terrifying. We, who were they, disappear. What was lost? And what did that mean for a family that disappeared, trying to keep the blood pure? The tool used to carve it was probably not a knife. The depth and pressure suggest a chisel, perhaps a hot iron or wood chisel. The wood fibers around the edge are raised, indicating that the carving was done slowly, without interruption, without lifting the tool, in one continuous motion. The inscription has no name or date, just darkened by ash and something else more biological. The specimen was taken but lost in transit. Records say. A letter from the local preservation board that same year reads, "Structure dismantled per county ordinance. Interior floor not fit for restoration. Fireplace stone removed for study. Engraving in floor consistent with witness testimony. Request for further evaluation denied. Language of no historical value. No photographs or transcriptions." And a second version of the message exists, handwritten in the journal of a state anthropologist who viewed the cabin a few weeks before demolition. He copied it into his personal notes, adding a faint line of ink beneath it, not of regret, but of purpose. It was unclear whether the message was meant to explain the family's retreat or justify it. Either way, it suggested a lineage designed not to forget, not to hide in shame, but to continue a silence, not due to accidental isolation, but the result of intention passed down through repetition rather than law. Beneath that message in a wood panel, not deep enough to allow for further carving, was the faint trace of a second stroke. Not a letter, not a full symbol, just an unfinished curve open, as if the sentence beneath the fireplace had never been meant to end. In the records of Hollow Creek Township, a rural county 2 hills above Briar's Tongue, there is an old leather book entitled Register of Stillbirths and Unbaptized Dead, 1849-1903. The binding was buckram slightly bent from dampness, undecorated, and not intended for public consumption. It was not in the main archives, but in a locked cabinet behind the old post office desk, passed through several clerks without a formal catalogue. The contents were sparse, mostly a few lines date, cause if known mother's name when delivered. But a pattern emerged. Beginning in 1853 and repeated regularly, every 2 or 3 years, a single sentence was invariably recorded. Unnamed child delivered uphill. No consecrated site assigned. The earliest entry is May 3rd, 1853. May 3rd, 1855. Over 46 years, there are 14 such notes, each matching the season, each anchored to the same ridge topography. No surname is given. No doctor signs. Mothers are listed as NA or unknown. What sets these lines apart is not just the repetition, but the ink used a deep, dark brown, consistent in hue and viscosity over decades despite the paper's discoloration. Compared to other entries in the same notebook, some faded, some smeared, the writing in these notes remains clear, precise, as if time had no effect. But the handwriting does change not all at once, but gradually. The slant shifts from slanted to vertical. The circles narrow. The spaces between letters shrink. By 1897, the writing was scarcely identical to the 1853 original, but the ink was intact, as if taken from the same source, preserved from all destruction. Archivists who examined the notebooks in 1926 did not notice anything unusual. In the margin of the summary report, a clerk wrote, "It is possible that the notes were copied from time to time, or copied on demand, but by whom and why were they maintained with such fidelity?" The notebook never directly mentions the slopes of Prior's tongue, but the phrase delivered uphill was a familiar local shorthand for the hollow, the land that turns your head. Older people in the area said that in those years, when anyone went up to the hollow to ask for help, they came back different if they came back at all. Midwives spoke of women falling silent in their 3rd trimester, then appearing a few weeks later as if nothing had happened. No cradle, no cloth, no funeral. An unnamed note from 1869 adds, "A note not found elsewhere, appearing too complete not to exist." The writing for this single line briefly returns to its original form before continuing on its path of change in the next entry. No graves are designated for these children. The church records have no ceremonies, no tombstones match the years around the area. When asked, descendants of nearby families admit to hearing of such births, but none can or will name relatives. By the final entry, May 3rd, 1899, the handwriting is tight and angular. The phrase is still a named child, delivered uphill. But underneath, faintly added in a different hand, 3 words, "not seen elsewhere," was seen before. The page ends there. No corrections, no witness signatures, just a dry brown thumbprint in the corner. In 1923, nearly a generation after the Briar's Tongue cabin had been abandoned, a state geological team sent by the Commonwealth surveyed the mine and the surrounding ridgelands. Coal beds were marked, soil was sifted, but beneath a shallow mound west of the cabin's foundation. The excavation team found something unrecorded. 9 human skeletons strewn in compacted red soil, stacked without coffins, orientations or markers. None of the remains were more than 18 inches deep. The bones were weathered but intact, as if preserved by silence rather than the soil. The skull lay next to a shoulder blade that did not belong there. The lower jaw was wedged under a hip bone. In the center, under a branching dogwood tree, was a small clay bowl. Inside were 9 teeth, 6 molars, 3 incisors, all uniformly worn, discolored, and all inexplicably identical. The remains were sent to the Department of Anthropology, Transylvania University. Professor Walter Haywood, then the youngest scholar to be promoted, took it up with interest. He was initially interested in the anatomy, The area had been marked by patterns of inbreeding isolation effects and genetic drift. He expected to see minor deformities, nutritional loss, traces of poverty. Instead, he found an absolute duplicate. The internal report described that of the 8 mandibles recovered, 3 molars had grooves, cusp, and wear that were not just similar but identical. Under the microscope, the cracks appeared in the same locations. The enamel density matched within 0.02, and one even had a natural chipping toward the right, consistent with a habit of grinding teeth. The findings were so precise that Haywood initially suspected errors in documentation or laboratory manipulation. But the samples had been delivered in sealed packages marked with burial sites. Even the skulls, when reassembled, revealed the cranial asymmetry, flat occipits, and shallow nasal bridges described in Dr. Wexley's 1896 missing person report. It was only when Haywood attempted to map the dental relationships connecting the teeth to the bone structure that he realized the larger incongruity. The timing did not match. The set of teeth assigned to a 35-year-old woman matched perfectly to a 12-year-old boy, despite the distinctly different pelvises and growth plates. It was as if the teeth could be exchanged without anyone noticing. In a letter written, but not sent, Haywood wrote, "I have studied the patterns of resemblance in consanguineous families. I have noted the recurrence of traits, but this is not heredity. This is structure that is copied. The mouth copies itself. The body obeys." He prepared a presentation for the Appalachian Anthropology Conference, but a few days before it was due, he withdrew it. No draft survives. In his official statement, he wrote, "Only preliminary data were withdrawn due to insufficient burial context." Informally, colleagues noted a change of attitude. I declined requests for further excavation. I sealed the tooth in a small cedar box and requested its return to the state, but there were no records to confirm it. The clay bowl was placed in the school archives and then lost in the renovations. Only a single, blurry, poorly lit photograph remains taken from above. In the corner of the frame, a folded frayed piece of linen is visible tucked under the bowl. On it, almost blurred through the dust, is embroidered a word. Same. No name, no number. Just one word, as if that were enough. In the winter of 1903, 2 years after the cabin was abandoned, a widowed farmer, Malcolm Berridge, testified to an Appalachian folk historian recording unexplained legends and practices. Berridge, who lived in the hollow next door, gave no age, but his memory extended into the post-war period. He did not write, but the account was transcribed in hard pencil on Browning paper now in the Berea College Special Archives. He described the family at the Bend, the name used for those without surnames, as silent neighbors. Never seen in the market, never in the post office, never taking or sending anything to the town. But what he remembered with unshakable certainty was a night in late October. Following a stray mule down the low slope of the mountain, he witnessed something that had never left his mind. The moon was full low, illuminating the clearing around the cabin. He pressed against the trees, careful not to intrude. Through the cracked planks, he saw them. Not 13, but enough to count by shadow. The children sat in pairs facing each other, between them a flat, low ground-level plate gleaming in the fire. At first, Berridge thought it was glass, but the light was not reflected, but fixed. A surface not to represent the world, but to confirm it. The children were motionless, not speaking. The fire behind them seemed to burn quietly, as if it were muffled. They sat cross-legged, their hands flat on their knees, not moving. The youngest child on the edge cried but made no sound. Then Anne, perhaps the eldest, walked between them, barefoot, her hands folded behind her back. She stopped in front of each pair, looking into the glass. Just one touch, two taps. The child on the left was taken. The child on the right remained. The empty space was not replaced. As Berridge put it, they were checking who hadn't disappeared, who stayed too long, who came back at the wrong angle, who didn't reflect. Those were the ones who had to go. He said he didn't tell anyone at the time because nothing could be heard without sounding like a lie. When the reporter asked what had happened to the child who had been taken, Berridge was silent. The transcript ends with an unfinished line. She was folded into something, I think, or under. Decades later, researchers revisited this account in a broader study of looking glasses in Appalachian lore, hoping to link it to folk magic or Scottish-style divination brought by settlers. But nothing matched. There was no chance, no symbol, no divination. Just observation testing, no interpretation. What puzzled scholars most was the accuracy. What they saw was not mystical. It was diagnostic, not mythical. An old, thick, slightly curved glass framed in pine found in 1978 at a thrift store in Breath County. The receipt from the 1930s simply read, "Unusual looking glass." On the surface, faintly visible only when the light was angled, were 13 lightly etched ovals. 12 of the prints were symmetrical and the 13th was empty. Only a faint, overpressed, solitary palm print. In April 1898, Miss Ellen Rowe, a 31-year-old unmarried nurse trained in the Florence Nightingale model, was sent to remote homesteads in the eastern Appalachians to administer cholera and smallpox vaccinations. She was known for her meticulousness, strict hygiene, and never missed a mission. Her travel journal through April 14th is complete in ink on soft paper stamped with the state seal. Each page lists the homestead, visited, the recipient's name, symptoms, and comments on behavior. The last entry, 6:45 a.m. April 15th, marks departure from Westridge, last delivery unnamed homestead under Briar's tongue. No further entries. No confirmation of arrival. No reply. At first, her disappearance was blamed on traffic problems, drifting roads, flash floods, narrow trails, and poor mule handling. But her bag containing the test tube, iodine tincture, and diary was found 2 days later neatly placed outside the cabin on the slopes. The bag was sealed. The test tube was intact. The ink in the diary was still wet. A local farmer, Henry Melson, wrote in an affidavit. It was undisturbed, as if she had just placed it before coming in. But the door was ajar, and I saw no movement. I left it alone. I did not dare to enter where there was no movement. When the county clerk was notified, no recall was ordered. A note in the April 1898 notebook remains in the Wolfe County archives. A Rowe presumed rewrote declined to pursue unless body or cause is produced. The cause was not determined. Her body was never found. A search request from Lydia's sister resulted in only a general telegram and a second letter. A request for a search party was unpostmarked, apparently never sent. Among the few remaining artifacts was a page from Miss Rowe's personal diary, separated from the work diary. This page was folded in 3, placed under a test tube. The writing was shakier than the clinical notes. They are not refusing care. They believe it was already given. I asked one boy his name. He told me to ask someone earlier. They do not measure time. They recite it over and over in each other's voice. The bottom half of the page was blank. In the right corner, a grey streak, not ink, not ash, soft thready, lightly brushed as if leaving a mark instead of a letter. In the years that followed, no public health officer returned the hollow, no public explanation, no internal memo asking for clarification. Her name never appeared in the state's crime scene death register. A penciled line in the April 1898 margin, later erased, is visible only in oblique light. Mo 1 administered 12 remaining no reaction. The pencil stops abruptly after the word reaction. No one knows what happened next. A faint curve of the letter N, then nothing. In 1991, the Appalachian Health Consortium launched a genetic survey in 4 counties in eastern Kentucky, part of a larger project to identify genetic risk factors for hypothyroidism, brittle bones, and craniofacial abnormalities. The study was designed to be anonymous, with blood samples, skull X-rays, and interviews recorded under strict confidentiality. No names or addresses were published in the final report, but in the margins of an internal unclassified report filed at a Bright County clinic, a series of handwritten observations changed the way the project was viewed. Of the 12 participants, 6 showed what the team leader called a generational facial overlap. Their photographs, kept in separate unindexed files, revealed a terrifying truth from profile to front. All 6 were versions of the same individual. Same eyes, same cheekbones, same angular jaws. Differences in age and skin tone were unmistakable. Mirror children across decades, one researcher whispered. Skull X-rays revealed other signs. Recurrent sphenoethmoidal deviations, unusually elongated zygomatic arches, and in 4 cases, partial fusion of the C3 and C4 vertebrae, creating hinges that do not exist in normal anatomy. When the X-rays were superimposed on each other, the labs thought the scanner was faulty, but it was not. The 6 individuals all came from plots less than 100 feet apart near the historic site known as Grins Hollow, a place name that has since disappeared from state records. In interviews, they spoke little about their families. 3 mentioned a place where people lived in a closed circle, 1 mentioned an unbroken line, and 2 separately but simultaneously used the phrase, "It's old blood from the tallied cabin." No one in the interview group used the phrase. It appears not in official records, not in legend, not in folklore. But it matches the language inscribed in the cabin's floor in 1901, where 13 tally marks under the fireplace are crossed out with a single stroke. A researcher refusing to take credit noted in an internal diary, "We are not charting a mutation. We are mapping a repetition. Something is holding pattern not through inheritance, but through return." The line was crossed out in red with the caption, "No mechanism proposed. Strike from final summary." The files are still available but are accessible only on request and only by researchers who have signed non-disclosure agreements managed by the private company that took over the original consortium in 1996. When the raw data were entered into the generation mapping software in 2008, the system reported a recursion loop error, an impossibility in population genetics revealing that 2 patients, 61 years apart, had mitochondrial patterns that were not just identical, but self-referencing. The computer crashed. The file was renamed Unresolvable Pattern Briar and never opened again. The folder containing the file no longer responded to commands. In modern genetic databases, lineages are documented by birth certificates, marriage licenses, land titles, DNA. But the family under Briar's tongue was not. No family tree, no spouses, no birth certificates, no entry in the National Mortality Register. Their existence was confirmed only by contradictions seen by the surveyor, but never indexed, heard by neighbors, but unnamed. They refused to be classified not by accident, but by structure. A 1905 memo to the Kentucky Bureau of Statistics from an anonymous registrar reads, "There are those who do not file because they are unaware. And then there are those who do not file because they do not recognize the need to be named in a system that will forget them. The cabin is gone, the logs soaked. The land returned to the unmarked woods, but its absence resonates more than its presence. Modern DNA surveys have found no samples from the anonymous family. No surviving local match in jaw-shape hair or eye blinks can be found to match the family. A technician at the 1998 Appalachian Medical Conference whispered about the family being so closed off that it was upside down, but no one recorded it. The most common name that tallied is not a real name. It is a counting symbol, not a physical one. Every part of their history, every anomaly, every ritual, every tooth joint suggests not evolution but imitation. They are not born in the traditional way. They repeat the voices, mirror the same words, repeated over the years. The same eyes blinking on the same skulls as if memory. Not genes were the instruments of inheritance, but the final record. The crossed out cabin. The crossed out tally. The mirror tapped and folded. Leaves only one question. What really goes away when a bloodline ends? A 1999 researcher from Ohio State who requested that her report not be published wrote one last line in a handwritten journal. They were not trying to preserve themselves. They were trying to repeat until it worked. The pen paused, but beneath the last word, printed faintly visible only when the light was tilted, was a mark that had never been inked. We are not gone. We are returned. Below, nameless, mirrored 13. Drawn once then again. We mark the living. We name the dead. But who is called when it is never recorded, only repeated? If this story makes you shudder, you are not alone. There are still similar things hidden in the archives, echoing through the blood, waiting to be unearthed.